Hi, I'm Rachel Hoffer from Phoenix. Welcome to the session When Peers Are Everything, Supporting Teens Through the Pandemic. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all other workshops will be available online after the GA ends. I hope you're planning to join us tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the Federation Together plenary. Today we're talking teenagers. Their summer plans were scuttled and their schools may be completely or partially online. At a time when interactions with their peers are essential, they're stuck at home with their families. Experts, not to mention parents, are concerned about depression and other mental health issues. Our panel today will discuss how Jewish organizations have rapidly responded with successful initiatives that connect teens to each other and help give them a sense of self-worth and purpose. I'm pleased to welcome our speakers and teachers for this workshop. Sarah Allen, Executive Director of the Jewish Teen Education and Engagement Funder Collaborative, Rabbi Daniel Brenner, Chief Education Officer of Moving Traditions, Drew Fiedler, Director of the BBYO Center for Adolescent Wellness, Jamie Krass, National Director of Youth Programs at Keshet, Brett Lubarsky, Director, Jewish Teen Initiative, Combined Jewish Philanthropies, and Alex Roth-Kahn, Managing Director of the Caring Department at UJA Federation of New York. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you all for making the time for such an important session. As Rachel said, I'm the director of the Teen Funder Collaborative, and we are a network of communities across the country who are working together to envision and scale meaningful opportunities for Jewish teens. And I'm proud to say that teen wellness had been one of our key areas of focus since 2013, driven in large part by the foresight of the LA Federation and the Jim Joseph Foundation. And all that we have learned is especially true in this moment. Here we are with nearly everyone in some form of quarantine, which means our teens are in close, constant proximity to their families, without space to breathe, and without the casual encounters with friends that are so important at this age. Supporting teen wellness was important before, and now it must be at the top of our agenda. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore what that means in conversations with my colleagues. We'll hear important statistics and research, and we'll learn from the work of a variety of organizations in a panel discussion. We'll make sure that you have opportunities to participate. Please feel free to use the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer in real time. And we'll have opportunities to participate through the chat. And we'll also have moments for reflection. And we'll close with the text study by Rabbi Daniel Brenner. So although we can't see or hear you, know that we're here for you, and we're happy to answer any questions after the session. So now we begin our journey, and I welcome Drew Fiedler from BBYO to set the stage.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and it's wonderful to meet you all. As Sarah said, my name is Drew Fiedler. I am the director of BBYO's Center for Adolescent Wellness. The goal of the center is how can we ensure that every youth-serving organization is a place where adolescents thrive. And so we work both with BBYO and with other youth-serving organizations to achieve that and to make that thriving happen in real life. And I'm going to share a bit with you all as we get started today about where are we now? What did the state of teen mental health and wellness look like before the pandemic? What is it looking like now? And what does that mean for some of the steps that we take? And so as we look at, teen mental health and wellness before COVID-19, we were sounding the alarm, right? This state that we're in didn't come out of nowhere. And the concern, as Sarah mentioned before, had existed prior and throughout our youth-serving organizations and throughout, I think, the United States, we were seeing a shift in our teens. We were seeing this shift from suicide being the third leading cause of death for adolescents to the second. We saw a 20% rise in anxiety disorders between 2007 and 2012. We've seen a continual rise in school shootings. We've seen, an increase in depression and anxiety, and in teens seeing that in their peers. And what we know about this stage in adolescent development is that so much is changing in the brain and in the body that, our youth are particularly vulnerable to the world around them and changes in the world around them. And that, this mental state continued to evolve and change over the last 15 years in really dramatic ways. And so as we look at what that was before we even came to the table, right? Before the world dropped out beneath them and graduations were canceled and proms were canceled and, right, all of these other momentous events transitioned into what they are now, it's no surprise that the world was already shifting beneath the feet of our teens, as well as the world that we knew in terms of teen mental health was shifting. And, I think it's very easy to look at our population in particular and say, that's great, but it was other kids. It was other people's problems. This is not a Jewish problem. Our youth, our teens excel. And the reality is that, as we saw in the Gen Z Now study, right, from 2019, that our teens are the same as every other teen out there. And the support that they need and the issues they have are the same. They're coping with that same academic pressure, and they need to, really excel and to show off that excelling, right? They have trouble dealing with failure, dealing with setbacks. They have the same anxieties and depressions as their peers, right? And so as we looked at it, these issues, these rises in anxiety and depression, in all these other mental health and wellness spaces were and are a Jewish problem, right? And so as we look at at this present moment, and our teens have transitioned into COVID-19, what is the impact we're seeing? As a result of recent events, we are seeing increased grief, loss, loneliness, and isolation in particular, right? That our teens, while at home and with devices, are still feeling that isolation and that missing piece of that physical interaction with their peers. We are seeing a rise in anxiety, in controlling behaviors. And when I talk about controlling behaviors, we're talking about eating disorders, obsessive compulsive, sort of patterned behaviors, right? Controlling behaviors in that way. We're talking about organizationally thinking about how they deal with things, cutting as well. Any of these kinds of behaviors where the whole key behind it is exerting control over another area of life to cope with a lack of control in this other space, right? And so as we're looking at it, that's really when we talk about controlling behaviors, that's what we're talking about. And for our youth in particular, this rise is generally in that controlling behavior space because of that loss of control in the other areas of their life. And our teens are being exposed more to the things that have happened at home. Domestic violence, we know, is increasing across the board. We're seeing a huge surge in calls to domestic violence hotlines and other spaces. Child abuse is going unreported and likely rising as well at home as people are stuck in situations that are tough and are trying to find new and different ways to cope, as well as increase in substance abuse. Our teens are seeing through social media and other spaces that coping with alcohol is appropriate. Coping with alcohol is okay, right? And whether or not we mean to send that message, it is a message that we're sending. And we need to be aware of what's accessible to them at home and how are they responding. And so in a lot of ways, it can seem like doom and gloom, but the reality is that trauma and the impact of trauma also leaves the opportunity for incredible resilience and growth. And that just because we are seeing some of these symptoms doesn't mean that the 100% outcome is going to be bad. We have also seen a number of studies, and I'm sure in your homes with your own teens, the ways that this has been incredibly positive. For some teens who may have been experiencing bullying in school, all of a sudden, that aspect of their lives has shifted, and they're actually able to engage better in their studies or in other areas. For some teens, this is a better way to communicate. We know that Gen Z likes their parents. We know they want to spend time with them. So, it's a different generational interaction than existed prior and in previous generations. And the other piece is that the brain is incredibly resilient and it wants to heal, so that for every negative, or for every piece of negative input, there are actually positive inputs that we can all have in the lives of our youth and in our teens to counterbalance that. And that living through something like a pandemic will actually help our teens to perform at a higher, better level throughout the rest of their lives, because they've realized they can, conquer this. They can get past it if and when we do get past all of this. And so having that life experience actually is a huge benefit. So while there are struggles, and we do need to be aware of the signs and the symptoms of those struggles, there's also this incredible benefit to living through tough experiences and thriving through those tough experiences. And I know, Sarah, you wanted to say a little bit more just about this specific research study.
Thank you. And thank you for really capturing what is a complex and nuanced situation. And it is important to really embrace and understand that there are bright spots that we can build on. So Jean Twenge, who is a researcher, and she wrote iGen, which is really a seminal book on Gen Z, surveyed 1,500 teens in the last few months, and was really surprised that mental health held steady and in some times had actually improved over the course of quarantine. We know that teens have been sleeping more, and teens who are sleep deprived suffer significantly more from depression. So the virtual learning has some benefits in terms of flexibility of schedule. We've found that 68% of teens said that their family has actually gotten closer through this process. And really some of the most interesting findings were about teens and technology. So it is not necessarily that their technology use has decreased. What has happened is that the research suggests that teens may be using it more purposefully and more intentionally than ever before. They're using it in active, connective ways, and also to check in on their friends. And so these bright spots are incredibly important to keep top of mind as we think about supporting teens and helping teens learn to support each other through the pandemic and beyond, and the role of families and their friends in this process. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Daniel Brenner from Moving Traditions, and he'll lead us through a conversation with our other panelists about how we can collectively do this urgent and important work. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So you mentioned Dr. Susan Twenge and Dr. Jean Twenge from San Diego State University. And I just want to share with you one of my favorite metaphors that she uses. And she has written for a long time about this iGeneration, which I trace in my own family because I have identical twin sons. I just graduated college, and I have a daughter who is still a teenager. And my sons say to her all the time, "We had dumb phones in middle school." So they think of her as the iGeneration. But one of the metaphors that Jean Twenge uses, and I think it's a very powerful one for us in the Jewish community, is that there is a difference between eating an apple and eating Apple Jacks. And that one of the things that the smartphone did was it transitioned you away from the connection and spending more time with other teens and spending time with your peers, and instead gave you this sugary high of, "Ooh, I was liked by one of my peers in this moment. Hooray, look at this." And I think that in the Jewish community for so long, we have said, we are an antidote to this because we provide in-person communication in which teens are collaborating and taking on leadership roles. And many of us come from summer camps, which did this incredible no technology for weeks on end kind of thing with teens. So I want to just start our conversation by thinking, especially given what Drew and Sarah just said, we're thinking, have we learned? What are some of those upsides? What are some of those downsides? What have we learned as this pandemic has played out now for 7 months? And what are we seeing with the teens that we are working with and the teens that we are serving? So I think I want to start off with Alex, if you could kick us off. Alex is from UJA Federation in New York City. So tell us what has happened in your neck of the woods.
Sure, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for having me. When it comes to supporting teens, as many on the call have already articulated and was even found in the messaging around what we would be discussing today, the key really is teens guiding teens. Our goal is to teach teens to be resilient in these challenging times through empowering them to support one another. Evoking the concept of Hineni, a few years ago, pre-COVID, in New York, out of the Federation, we created an initiative called Here Now. It's a teen-led online and in-person initiative promoting mental health, promoting well-being, and promoting resiliency. It's a web platform. It's housed on My Jewish Learning. You can look it up and we'll send you a link following the webinar. And it's staffed both by the Jewish Board, a licensed mental health organization here in New York, and the team at My Jewish Learning. It's really for Jewish teens to connect around what matters to them. As part of Here Now, teen authors write their own articles, they host their own blogs, they run their own apps, they produce writing, they produce artwork, they produce music that lets them articulate their feelings and their emotions to one another. This March, Here Now really evolved from a pretty cool project to a lifeline. This past summer, we had 32 interns, all from their own homes, working on screen.
These are all teenagers?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
32 summer interns. They spent their time writing for the website, creating Zoom programs for other teens, engaging other teens in their own writing, and managing the social media. And the teens focused primarily on how to create a supportive environment for each other. I thought it would be interesting to share with you some of the insights that the teens articulated, by and large in writing, but also through other forms of media, in an effort to better articulate their own challenges and to work more effectively with the adult caregivers in their lives. The main takeaways, as I understood them through the writings of teens, is really one, that teens need routines, and two, that teens and parents really need boundaries. Teens are absorbing all of the stress that their parents might be experiencing related to job loss, related to health in their internal family and the families around them and the lives of their coworkers. They're internalizing all of the financial challenges, and many have lost their own jobs, whether they're babysitting jobs or other forms of skill development that these teens have been cultivating for a long time in an effort to develop themselves. And when everyone is in the same space, parents have to be able to talk about and deal with their own challenges in some type of private environment. They have to appreciate that the teens are going through their own loss, when as adults, we might be occupied with what feels like a larger challenge, being furloughed or laid off. We got to keep it to ourselves and shut our world away from theirs so that our stress doesn't become conflated with theirs, and they don't wake up in the morning feeling all of their anxiety compounded by all of our anxiety. And just because teens are stuck at home with far less activities, it doesn't mean that they actually have more time. They're being asked to do more chores, to look after their younger siblings, to absorb work in the house. And some teachers and some schools are giving even more homework because there is a perceived reality that there aren't extracurricular activities and that they're doing, it's an act of generosity to help keep teens busy. Teens do, in fact, need the structure that school had provided for decades, the routine of getting up, of leaving their house, of participating in clubs and activities of interest, and then coming home. And without that structure, it's been very hard for teens to stay on top of everything and to know how to prioritize. It's our job to help them to build those routines. Coping mechanisms that teens have articulated for themselves and to each other, to practice gratitude out loud or in general. Bottom line, we can help them to articulate things that are positive in their lives, to encourage them to volunteer, to recognize that they can give and they can contribute even in this challenging environment, and to be able to enable them to exercise their own space, to be able to reimagine their rooms, to own something within their house that doesn't feel like it's being confounded with everybody else's baggage. It's theirs. It's just like their locker room, or their locker rather, at school. It's precious to them. It's something that embodies their spirit. I do want to note for just a brief minute that I think that there's a difference between building resiliency, promoting wellness, and addressing deep, pervasive clinical issues that warrant a diagnosis and a full treatment plan. And in this case, it's an imperative to ensure that trained adults have a role in supporting our teens. So at UJA Federation of New York, in addition to these tremendous efforts to get teens to speak to teens, to build these plans, as we've discussed about creating boundaries and building their own sense of self-esteem, we have also gone to significant efforts through an initiative that we call Partners in Caring to build in the support of trained social workers, trained psychologists within synagogue environments and within day schools, so that one understands that the shul or the synagogue is not just the office of the rabbi, the office of the cantor, but there's also a social worker or a psychologist that's equipped to help teens and frankly, all members of the community, but specifically teens in navigating these troubling times and being prepared with a license and with information about how to navigate what might be a new diagnosis, or medicine might be required, or therapy might be required, and to offer that in the destigmatizing and normative platform of synagogue life. And so too in day schools, we are pumping in social work support like never before, so that even in the schools that are solely online, but of course in person as well, as many opportunities to talk about wellness, to train teachers to be able to identify where a behavioral challenge might really be an opening to talk about what's going on in one's chemical makeup in their mind, and to ensure that if there is any questionable behavior, when any teen articulates something that makes you believe this child might be at risk, that they are embraced by a system of support that wants to take them to the next step, and that that's done in a normative place and is seen as just a part of life.
Alex, that so much of what you said is resonating with me. I just want to highlight two things in particular, because I think that they are messages that we all need to remember. The first is, it is just amazing to see what teens have done in the home and with their own friends to support them. I know that just in my organization, Moving Traditions, we had a teenager who created a series for her friends who were voting for the first time. And she did a Voting with a Feminist Lens series and attracted other teens to it. And I think there are numerous examples of teenagers who are stepping up in ways that we didn't anticipate, which has been great. And the other thing that you highlight, really reminding us that there are teens who really need professional help. One of the things that Jean Twenge found in her recent research around the pandemic is that for the most part, teens were stable, but in homes where a parent had lost a job, the depression rates were double than in other homes. So the depression rates are 25% and higher in those homes for the teenagers. So just being mindful that for some teenagers, this is a very, very scary time. And you beautifully, the charge beautifully, that in our Jewish institutions, in our communities, we have the resources. We can connect people to those resources. We can make sure that people are supported. We just need to be making an extra effort at this time. So I really appreciated all of that. Brett, I'm going to turn to you now. And you've spent many, many years working directly with teenagers. I know that. And recently you have started to think more about your community and the teenagers, the Jewish teenagers of Boston, greater Boston. Could you say a little bit about what you see as some of the upsides and the downsides of the pandemic and how you have adjusted your work?
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. And thanks for having me. I think, as many of the themes that have been shared before by Alex and Drew and Sarah, we're seeing that community and connection are more important now than ever, or as important. And it looks a little bit different. And so through the work that we've been doing at Combined Jewish Philanthropies and Jewish Teen Initiative, we saw our peer leadership fellows playing a central role in making those connections and helping to, reach out to their peers once a month to say, hey, how are you? Where are you? What's going on? And when COVID-19, shifted things, it really was not just, hey, how would you like to be connected to the Jewish community? But also like, hey, those connections are probably going to look a little different right now. So how can we help you, and how can you know that your community cares about you? The central themes of social emotional learning have been important and have been integrated in Jewish educational best practices for years, and that side of spirituality in there as well. And right now, teens and adults together are yearning for connection to Jewish community through opportunity for ritual, and really to be able to have the conversation. So we partnered with the Teen Funder Collaborative and many of the cities where teen initiatives are exploring different ways to engage teens throughout our country, to think about what this can look like specifically around mental health and wellness. And collective compassion was put into the community a few months ago, and around Mental Health Awareness Month, where we were able to create opportunities for conversation, connection, and community for teens, for parents, and for the professionals who serve them. And really opening the gateways to figuring out what are the tools that we need to be able to best support our teens. Are there different apps? Are there playlists? Teens, a big theme throughout their coronacation was, how are you vibing? What are the vibes? And really trying to navigate the everyday stressors. Stress was already present for our teens before COVID. And it, not to say that it multiplied, but it just looks different. And so how do we help them build that resiliency and those skills to be able to do that? Thinking about the space that we create for ourselves, our bedroom is our sanctuary, and so how to be able to create different types of spaces for learning and for connection and community, and for time to just shut off and unplug and be able to just be and process all the things that are going on in the world around us. And so we had specific events in the spring that brought teens from all across the country together. Geographic barriers are not looking the same now. In a virtual world, we can connect in different ways. And so 13 states and 28 cities and towns just in the greater Boston catchment area, we had teens coming together to talk about healthy relationships and combating anxiety and stress and sharing stories of resilience. Everybody has their own narrative and their own connection. So how they can kind of really let their friends know and remind themselves that we're not alone in this, but we're actually in this together. And really being able to connect the dots between mindfulness and mental health, to add that sense of intentionality to our lives. And, you know, Alex mentioned before about saying Haneni, like, here I am, I'm showing up, I'm fully present. How can we do that, you know, while helping our teens find that sense of shlemut, that sense of wholeness as they navigate their journeys?
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. I'm vibing on it. Is that the right way to say it? I'm not sure. But I would love to, like, a specific, was there something that you felt, wow, this really met the needs of teens, or this either app or playlist or program? Was there something in particular that you felt like this is something that they're taking in and they're making it their own?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were fortunate to partner with Sarah Allen and the Teen Funder Collaborative to bring in Sophie Regal, who spoke to our teens about her own journey. She's a student at Duke University, and she's written a few books with her mom and solo, and to be able to really say, here's a story that we can all relate to. Here are some concrete tools to be able to navigate, and to have our peer leadership fellows helping to moderate those conversations, to create that space, to have, you know, an expert in the area who's really sharing their own story, and to have that space for our teens to help ask questions and to be able to connect with one another, and have that safe space that Drew was talking about before, you know, that they really need to be able to process what's going on, and to be able to figure out, you know, what are the best practices that other people are practicing, to be, how can I figure out what's going on in my life, and how do we get from here to there?
Beautiful. So Jamie, I want to swing it over to you, because I think, like, you have a unique perspective on all of this, and I'd love to hear what you and the teens you work with at Keshet have been experiencing over the last few months.
Thank you so much. Also, just as a reminder, folks, hi, I'm Jamie. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Youth Programs at Keshet. So Brett, two pieces that you just shared really resonated. And actually, like, you probably saw me smiling goofily at you because it was just resonating so hard. One of that was the removal of geographic barriers has in many ways been sort of a blessing for Keshet programs and for the LGBTQ Jewish youth we work with, but also I'm sure for many of your other projects and initiatives that you have going on. So for example, we've seen over 100 teens become connected to Keshet programs and directly involved who otherwise might not have been, either because they've identified as not being out at home and thus not able to go to our previous sort of iteration of programming, which was all in person. So depending on parents for transportation or funding, or depending on parents to help them navigate a whole other host of barriers. So that was one piece, is that we've really gotten a chance to connect with youth who are in totally different places geographically, but also in terms of their own journeys with their LGBTQ identities. So that's been one thing that has been so surprisingly wonderful about what has been going on. And then also for those youth to connect with each other. So we have folks who've come to every single Keshet Shabbaton, which is essentially a weekend retreat, which was the program that we primarily did with youth before the pandemic. We've had folks who've come to every single Shabbaton connect with folks who are for the first time entering an intentionally LGBTQ Jewish space. So what that means for someone's journey and what that new relationship can mean for them can make a world of difference. So that was something that I was really kind of holding. And I'm curious to hear everyone else's thoughts about what are some of the benefits that we've been seeing happen. The other thing I was thinking about was you mentioned sort of the blurring of time and space that has happened in so many of our lives. So many of our paradigms around these two particular dynamics have shifted entirely. So what that means is I feel like I work at home. I don't, and I also feel like I live at work. So what does that mean? It means that the boundaries that would have been established by a commute are gone. And for youth, those are boundaries that existed between going to school, coming home. Now it's there. Or hanging out with friends. It's almost always probably in the same place, either sitting on their bed or maybe sitting at a desk or sitting on the floor against their bed. And so one thing that Keshet did that we actually got amazing responses from teens on was we sent out care packages. We called them TLC packages, tender loving care packages, to over 100 youth around the country. And They were filled with Keshet swag, but they were also filled with books and treats and projects, do-it-yourself projects that they could do at home. It was filled with pieces and stickers that intentionally affirmed their identities, other ones that said, I heart Jewish queers, and, you know, a lot to just sort of celebrate themselves. And we sent that at home. So and many, at least 40 of those 100 folks who signed up had never been to a Keshet program before. So for them, there might have been other barriers that we're not aware of that was keeping them from accessing an online program. But this was something that they did have access to. So we're playing around too with how do we connect with youth, and how can we also help them build those beautiful home sanctuaries like y'all were just talking about.
Beautiful. I want to just follow up with the question that you posed, Jamie, because I think like that's a really good question. Like, what are the incredible silver linings that we're seeing here? What are the, like, wow, I didn't realize that this could happen. I know that Drew has some answers to this, because Drew shared some, like, I had no idea that BBYO still had retreats like during this whole thing, but like, let's hear a little bit about that, because that kind of stunned me. And I think if other people have some silver linings, I'd love to hear that as well.
I mean, I think that's the beauty, right, of all of our programs and of what we all did when the pandemic hit. We just said, okay, well, then we have to get creative. And, you know, I think through BBYO On Demand, we have seen just such a huge presence of our teens, both for Shabbat. We find regularly teens tuning in and really wanting to engage in that ritual. And then also, both last weekend and then coming up in November, we have our virtual regional conventions. And what we have seen, at least last weekend, and we know coming up again, is multiple speakers and even days dedicated to mental health and wellness. And our teens want this education. They want to be able not just to help themselves, but to help their peers. And so they're looking for information like Seize the Awkward, like, you know, Be There, which is a collaboration between Jack and the Born This Way Foundation. They're looking for, how do I help myself? How do I help my friends? How do I start to set some of those, you know, boundaries, learn some of those self-care skills? And for me, that's been incredible to see. And, you know, it's always amazing to watch our teens step up and say, no, we want this. Right? We want to lead the way in this. We want to take care of our peers and ourselves, and recognizing that this is such a huge piece of their mental health wellness. You know, I saw someone put in the chat, how can we demonstrate as parents, you know, coping skills for our teens? And I think there's two pieces of this, right? One of which is they're finding and they're building those schemas for coping skills in incredible ways. And the other side of it is that as they're watching their parents go for walks, cook a family dinner, find a new family TV show. You know, I remember I was talking with someone and they were so excited for Game of Games, and that was their new family television show that they all watched together. And I remember growing up, for us, that was TGIF, right? That was what brought our family together over, you know, post Shabbat dinner on Friday nights, and everyone has their own rituals, their own customs, but we're seeing that come into play. And in particular, our teens are leading the way in that space of learning and growing and developing. That's been so incredible to watch and to really make a difference. And when their friends are struggling, they're reaching out for help also. So as they're getting messages of, you know, potentially from a peer, I'm thinking of hurting myself, they're reaching out to other adults and they're saying, hey, I don't know how to help. And they're both looking for the skills, but also the support. And so I think there are a lot of silver linings to be had that are showing us just the incredible resiliency of our teens.
I love that. You're reminding me like how important, like at the very beginning, we talked about the boundaries are, like setting boundaries between parents and teens and like how that's happening. I know that from at least one of the programs that we offer, Moving Traditions, is a parent and child program, which is for 6th and 7th graders. And as we adapted it for the online environment, we realized we needed to have them on separate devices so that the program could be parents and teens having a conversation, parents go off and have their conversation, teens go off and have their conversation, then they come back and have the conversation. And it just got me thinking about technology in all of this. And I'm just interested, what have you learned about technology and what technology works and what technology doesn't work? And I noticed I just want to add on to this question. We had a number of people ask about special needs education and people who are different learners. So I think that's always a good time to and how does that work with technology? Add that layer, especially now that so much of what we do is virtual. Love to hear just some responses about how you've handled that particular challenge and what you see. Does anybody want to go first on this? Brett, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
I'm happy to jump in. We've actually been thinking about working and connecting with teens in the special needs space quite a bit. We partnered with the Ruderman Family Foundation to really think about, how do we remove those barriers to participation? I think there are organizations around the country right now that are doing wonderful work to really think differently. I think, when you're looking at a screen, there are 5 different levels of communication opportunity that don't necessarily exist when you're having an IRL in real life conversation with somebody. So, you have the chat box going on. There's what are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at the camera? There's a lot going on. And I think that's one of the things that we're actively asking with our community partners right now is how can we create better resources for teens of all abilities to be able to connect with one another. There's a lot out there between BBYO On Demand and Nifty X and US Wi-Fi, and the list is a mile long. And to really think about how can we aggregate that information, we can sift through the noise a little bit and be able to reach people where they are and specifically say, hey, your community wants you to be able to connect in the ways to which you'd like to. What does that look like? And how can we help you find your path? And so I think through sharing information and through creating new opportunities to help encourage conversation and connection, we're just scratching the surface. Definitely don't have all the answers, but we're working on it.
That's great. Alex, I know that you at the UJA Federation have done some work in this special needs community, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your response.
Yeah, so we've actually been on a really interesting journey the past few months, and in some ways have seen almost a crossover of strategies between some individuals with developmental disabilities, those who have been struggling to become audible speakers, teens who are not yet speaking, versus teens who have the ability to speak, to engage, who try to hang out in normative spaces and communicate just like we're communicating now. Almost a complete reversal in forms of engagement. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that, we know that if you have a developmental disability, particularly if you are on the autism spectrum, but so many developmental disabilities get in the way of us being able to communicate like we are at this moment, with eye contact across a screen, hearing visual cues, picking up on one another's body language without being in the same room. We're able to do that, and so many teens are not. And this online world for them has become overwhelming. And so what we have seen and celebrated is, I don't want to use the word retreat, but a desire to make life slightly more narrow in regards to who communication happens with on a regular and ongoing basis. And to ensure that 1 or 2 people are either in the backyard consistently, dialoguing, talking about things, sharing things of interest, reviewing schoolwork, working together academically, and also as much as possible, one-on-one and in person, or one-on-one in the screen, focusing on the value of eye contact and reading body cues, because these are skills that those teens need desperately. And then, whether it's ironic or just beautiful, teens who have been struggling to find their speech, And I hope all of us know some of these folks because they are out there. They communicate quite effectively through devices. Now, through the chat feature, not in the same way that Jamie was describing, kids who identify with LGBTQ and are able to chat privately. But if you evoke that concept, if you're comfortable in chat and you can type and express yourself, you now have a world to access of so many other people who are communicating in that same way. And we need to welcome those teens into our lives. And if you don't know them, I promise you they're living in your neighborhoods. They're out there and they haven't been yet engaged by the forums that we typically turn to because our framework doesn't accommodate yet. So there's a moment and I think we should seize it.
I mean, I have to say that that really resonates with me. One of the things that I specialize in is thinking about adolescent boys and the worlds that they inhabit. And one of the trends that we've noticed in the recent research at that is that boys are gaming a lot more during the pandemic. And a lot of the reason is exactly what you're speaking about, which is like, it gives them an opportunity to chat with someone else. And like that chatting is their way to relate to others. It's no surprise to me that that's part of what's happening here. Drew, I know you have a lot to say about technology. Do you want to chime in here?
Well, I think even for us as adults, right, the technology has been a roller coaster. There are days where it works perfectly, and there are days where I screen now, so whether you all can hear me or not, right? One of those great moments of technology. So I think that for our teens as well, it's been, both an opportunity to teach, right? Some of these things come more naturally to our digital natives, as well as it's been a wonderful opportunity to think about how do we take inclusion and bring it virtual, right? How do we start to think about, as Jamie did, right? And we so often forget, stating our pronouns and really making a true space that is welcoming and inclusive to everyone. How do we think about utilizing different kinds of media? How do we think about, right, programming in that way? Do we use a Jamboard, a mural, right? What are those things? And how do you create an engaging program to many different kinds of learners in a virtual space, right? That in and of itself is a challenging thing. And so it's been, it's been amazing. I think the speed at which we all have learned. And I think watching our teens really teach us how to utilize that content to its fullest. And also sending us a signal when they're done with the content, right? I think that we also recognize that we can't all program all the time, that just as we're tired and fatigued at night from all these Zoom calls, our teens are too. And so how are we meeting them where they're at and encouraging them to take breaks? Because I think that such a key piece of resiliency and also that learning of coping skills is learning that it's okay to step away and you won't, and not having FOMO, not having that fear of missing out, that it will be okay, because otherwise we keep doom scrolling. We stay on for way too long. We're all inundated with information. And so how do we also learn to take that break from technology? And I think whether, our teens of any functioning, right? They all need that break from the virtual space at some point in time. It has incredible benefits. It also, we do need to find the spaces where we take those breaks.
Amen. In the chat, there were two other things I just want to tag really quickly. One is just how difficult it is for parents to keep their own anxieties away from their children. It's impossible. Then the other thing is, like, we're all in an election season in which there are lots of anxieties coming up. So I want to just sort of double down on what Drew is saying here, which is to say that it's okay to step away and to breathe and to be sad. These are things that are healthy. And like, that's something that we as adults need to learn, but also for teens who have intensity of emotion, which is amazing. Like that's something that is really helpful to remind teens like that is a possibility. Jamie, did you want to weigh in on the technology conversation?
This is somewhat about technology, but actually it sort of meets the question that came up when it comes to sort of navigating different feelings around the election and how to support young folks. So one thing we've done already at Keshet is we've actually already scheduled and like fully booked programming throughout that first 7 to 10 days after the election that's intentionally named as processing space. And so it's unstructured and unprogrammed. So when I take that and like zoom out this notion of what does it mean to create unstructured opportunities for young folks to connect with each other, sometimes we overprogram even a space. So even if we're using all these amazing different modalities that meet different learning preferences or multiple intelligences, we also have the opportunity to meet young folks where they're at when it comes to those unstructured moments that they're missing out on. So walking in the hall with someone, sitting with someone at lunch, sitting with new people at lunch. How do we sort of create opportunities where that can exist? And so that's something we've really been trying out at Keshet is we have regular programming happening on Monday that is solely teen run and intentionally very much unstructured. It's either framed as a hangout space or an arts and crafts space where you can engage to whatever degree you want. But maybe you just want to be coloring and knowing that someone is there in case you did want to say something.
Can we please have this for adults? I think I would do this.
I'm game.
I'm in. I love it. I really love it. All right. I want us to end very, very quickly. In our tradition, we say, Ein chadash tachat hashemesh. There is nothing new under the sun. It's a reminder that things do not change, even though lots of things do change. In one sentence, think for a second, like what has not changed about work with teens that we should just be mindful of things that have not changed? Anybody want to hit that?
I'm happy to take a stab. I think that one thing that has not changed is they still are the ones who can most articulately tell you what they need if we give them the space to do so. And so I think that is such a key piece, that even though our teens are living through this, they are still fully able to say, no, I've had enough, or like, this is what I need right now. And I think that we so need to take that step back and give them that space to lead because they still can hold it very much.
Beautiful. Anyone want to add to that?
I'm happy to add. I think what hasn't changed is our teens still want those other positive Jewish role models in their lives to help support them and help inspire and empower them to be able to do the great work that they do and to build our community and to create those spaces. You know, I think talking about the upcoming election and everything, you know, one of the things that our peer leadership fellows really landed on is they needed that space. So they created these low-key convos. I don't know how low-key a conversation is about racial injustice or political activism, but to be able to say, hey, we need a space to be able to talk to one another, to be able to ask the hard questions, and to be able to explore how we can grow as individuals and be able to connect to our community.
I wanted to share something that I recently heard from a kid who was saying to an adult, to a friend of mine, you know, one day I'm going to be the Zadie, I'll be the grandfather, and somebody will be asking me, you lived through the pandemic, Zadie. What was your life like? And you know what I'll say? I'll say my parents were home for dinner every night. And it brought chills to me. And really, I think it represents the age-old value that continuity and love and connection between a child and a caregiver is what that child needs to thrive. And certainly the sense of resiliency internally and one's own self-esteem.
Beautiful. Jamie, do you have a last word here?
Just that one, that also gave me chills. Oh my gosh, I actually have goosebumps. Thank you so much for sharing, Alex. But also, I think I would just share that teens are incredibly strong and their struggles and their pain is real. So however we can show up for them and be with them and support them being with each other, that's the path we should be following.
Amen to everybody. Snaps. Okay. But yeah, really, really, that inspires me to hear everybody's reflection. So it's very important that we think about all the different types of teams. We've touched a little bit on this, but we really wanted to make sure that we gave some time for Jamie to talk about Keshet's work. And now we're going to pass it over to Jamie. And thank you, panelists, for this. This was fantastic. Great conversation. We're going to let Jamie take us through some of Keshet's recent findings. Go for it.
Thank you so much. And spoiler alert, I'll also be sharing some findings from the Trevor Project, which is another leading organization out there supporting LGBTQ youth around the country. So while we've learned some amazing bright sides to some of what teens are experiencing more broadly, like feeling like you can connect more with your parents, having dinner as a family more often, we also are learning that for about 30% of LGBTQ youth, and specifically about 40% of trans and non-binary youth, they're feeling that they can't fully be themselves at home. And that could be attributed to an assortment of things, feeling disconnected from whether they're specific affinity spaces like a GSA, a Gender Sexuality Alliance at school, or again, feeling separated from those unstructured moments at school, but where they feel like they can fully express themselves and their identities. So one thing that I would love to encourage all of us to think about, and we're opening the chat so that we can connect with each other in this way, is how to make all of the spaces in which teens are connecting with each other more affirming of LGBTQ identity, because that not only benefits LGBTQ youth, it benefits everyone in that space. So I'd like to just pose a question to everyone who's listening. Thank you so much for being here. What are some things you've noticed about this space in which we've conducted ourselves so far that seem affirming towards folks who hold LGBTQ identities? What have you noticed that feels affirming or particularly inclusive? Please feel free to answer in the chat. I see someone pointed out the signs and water bottle, pronouns in our names. Absolutely. Yes. So the signs and the pronouns, these are visible reminders. I like to call them signposts. So anyone who's entering this space is seeing, oh, okay, at least someone in this space, and every single member of us has displayed our pronouns or shared them in some way. At least these folks in this space are acknowledging LGBTQ identity. So already from the moment, before I even speak, before anyone even tunes in about all the incredible work they're doing with youth, you're seeing these visible indicators of this being an affirming space. Great. Great recognition of pronouns. Yes, welcoming conversations, the language we use, avoiding using gendered language when we're not specifically talking about those kinds of identities is super helpful. And so I'm really grateful for y'all listing that already. Now, another question I have is, what are some practices beyond just these small ones that we've experienced together that you could adopt in your own community spaces, or that you feel could be adopted in the spaces in which teens are connecting with one another? So let's go ahead and fill up that chat with what else could be done in any space to help send an affirming message to LGBTQ teens. Oh, amazing. Someone just shared that their own child shared seeing on doors of classrooms signs saying that they are LGBTQ safe spaces and rainbow flags, and that they're very comforting. I can attest myself, I also feel very comforted when I do see a rainbow flag somewhere or another indicator. Cultural competency training, yes. A much more intricate process and so very important, and something that Keshet also focuses on as well. Our education and training department is phenomenal, and they're working very hard to create that kind of institutional change, even now in this sort of online realm. Addressing people in the way that they introduce themselves. Absolutely. So a best practice I would love to encourage us to think about is, when we're working with teens, how are we checking in with them about how they'd like us to be communicating with them? So for example, even if it's the same group of teens over and over, it can be so valuable to still ask folks to share their name and pronouns, because those might change. a young person might be experimenting with something different. And what better space and what better gift can you provide them than the opportunity to share that in a safe and affirming way with you? How incredible is that? Something else that we could do is checking in with them about, hey, so I know you've shared this name or these pronouns in this space with me. When I'm communicating with your parents, what name or pronouns should I be using? So for organizations where there's a lot of that parent interaction, that can be really helpful. And again, help that young person feel so affirmed and held by you in that space. Amazing. I see another suggestion, more parent education on how to be supportive is needed for your own children. That is super helpful as well. So as an organization, if you're working with parents, what are ways you can help onboard parents onto some of these practices that you're sharing? So for example, you'll notice that in a lot of different email signatures, someone might share what their pronouns are and it leads to a link. Mine leads to a link that goes to, it's called mypronouns.org. And that is an amazing sort of onboarding platform of explaining why we do this. And that can be so helpful because we're all at different places in terms of our learning around this. Yes, I see someone else wrote having discussions about LGBTQ issues in the news and helping teens process them and discuss how they can be allies. Amazing. Yes, including LGBTQ identity in the content of our programming is so important, whether that's just including content that was created by LGBTQ folks or content that centers LGBTQ voices and experiences. Again, super helpful to do. Great. Encouraging LGBTQ teens to serve as role models among their own peers. Yes, investing in leadership development is great for every teen we all work with. And how can you infuse LGBTQ inclusion in that? How can you, in conversations with young folks, help them identify the ways for them to take on more leadership? And yes, I see a question about providing the link to that pronouns page in the chat. I will do so shortly afterwards. Thank you so much. Another reason why doing this online and having these visible indicators, audio indicators is so important is because so many youth are coming at these opportunities from so many different places in their own journeys. So for example, I had shared that that sometimes we have folks tap into our programs who never turn on their video or only use chat because they're not feeling like they have privacy. But that's not something that's unique to just LGBTQ folks. So many young folks may feel like they don't have the privacy to have authentic conversations or to authentically engage with our programs. So laying it out from the outset, even just on your registration page, hey, when you're tapping into this program, you don't have to use video, you don't have to use audio, you're welcome to use chat. We're also going to be using activities that involve texting in, like you could use Poll Everywhere, or you can use Mural where someone can draw and express themselves in that way. We're going to use all these different modalities. So please feel free to express yourself in the way that feels right for you at this time. That helps everyone, including folks who also are neurodiverse and maybe craving some of these different opportunities for a variety of different reasons that aren't associated with LGBTQ identity. Someone asked, does Keshet have parent education material / curriculum? Yes, we absolutely do. And I will be sure to link to our resource library in our chat. You're more than welcome to look into them. You're also more than welcome to reach out to us, and I'm happy to help point you in a more specific direction. Thanks for asking. Another reason why this is so important, why adopting these practices, even as small as they might seem, like having a sign in the background or a safe zone sticker, or turning your profile picture into a safe zone sticker as a reminder. The reason why this can be so important is because while so many youth are relying on each other for that peer-to-peer support, and that's life-saving and life-changing, we also know that LGBTQ folks are 3 times more likely to express that they don't feel they have access to mental health support that they need right now. And this is based on a survey that the Trevor Project conducted just over the past summer, so specifically focused on young folks' experiences during the pandemic. So we're learning that LGBTQ folks might be experiencing this sense of accessibility differently. So anything we can do to help them feel more connected can make a world of difference. One other thing I would love to share with you that I'm always holding on the inside, for a young trans teen, having one adult in their life who consistently uses their right name and pronouns, and that's the name and pronouns that they share with you and tell you to use, having that one person decreases their risk of completing suicide by 50%. So that one presence can be you, and that one presence can utterly change their life. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for all you're doing. I'm actually going to swing it back over to Brett, who's going to carry us into some reflective practices. And again, I'll be sharing those links in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. This has been an incredible conversation so far, and it's been great connecting with everyone. Please keep those questions coming in the chat and the Q&A. Today it looks different, but community and connection are more important than ever before, and our teens are yearning, as we've heard from everybody today. They're yearning for meaningful points of connection, those feelings of belonging to something bigger than themselves, and opportunities to express their creativity, their values, opinions, and identities. If we weren't virtual with hundreds of people right now, we absolutely would dive into the experiential modalities in how to use many of these technology tools that we've mentioned. What are the best tools to create those moments and experiences of connection in virtual spaces? All Jewish educators seem to be Zoom producers these days, and really thinking about how parents can support, how the community can support our teens. Since we only have a few minutes, we'd love to pose a few questions for you to think about. Please feel free to reflect on them individually or respond in the chat box. How is your community helping to build resiliency amongst teens during this strange and challenging time? What are the roles that Jewish professionals can or are playing to help support teens and their families? Where are the gaps? What can we be doing better? Are there opportunities for your community to partner and collaborate around this critical issue of teen mental health and wellness? Not everybody is alone, and we need to be working together and finding those opportunities for collaboration between organizations to be able to help our teens and our communities feel like we're not so alone right now. And who and what are the resources available in your community? It's really important to mention that a lot of the times people just don't know about the resources that are out there for them, that are available and accessible. So how can we make those resources more accessible for everybody? The Teen Funder Collaborative and many of the partners represented on this call today have developed a number of helpful resources to help our teens and communities navigate. And resources will be available in the coming weeks from our friends at JFNA. And I'd love to please invite you to keep chatting and raise up questions or best practices that you've had in your community. And I'd love to turn it over to Daniel to help us end today and ground us in a little bit of text and tradition to remind us what this is all about.
Thank you, Brett. And just really thank everybody for being part of this wonderful conversation. I want to end just on a very personal note of just thinking about how do we as educators and Jewish leaders use the tradition to help teens who are navigating some of the challenges that this pandemic has brought about. I was talking with a friend of mine whose daughter is in 9th grade. And when the pandemic hit, she was trying to maintain all of her friendships from school and sports and everything else. And she was just totally and completely exhausted by trying to maintain all of these friendships, and was starting to get really depressed and starting to feel like she didn't have any real close friends. And it really reminded me that there are some incredible ways of thinking about friendship within the Jewish tradition. And one of the things that I do in my work at Moving Traditions is I think about all of the mentors, and we have hundreds of groups of small groups of teens who are meeting with mentors in institutions around the country, in Jewish community centers and synagogues. And usually it's a group of 8 to 12 teenagers who are meeting once a month with a mentor and talking about the things that are on teens' minds. And we've had to focus a lot on how the pandemic has challenged people's friendships. And we start off with some questions for the teens. Just simply, how has this changed your friendships? Have you deepened any friendships? Have you lost any friendships? What are some of the tensions that you've had with friends as you've gone from seeing them in person to seeing them online? How have you tried to maintain some in-person communication or contact with friends? Really, all of those questions are on the minds of teens. And then we connect their responses to the tradition. So I want to share with you some of the texts that we use in order to get them to think from a place of Jewish spiritual and emotional learning, like what speaks to this? And I want to do so by sharing just two different sources. One is one of my favorite Yiddish proverbs, and it's a Yiddish proverb about friendship, and it is, don't be too sweet, you'll be eaten up, and don't be too bitter, you'll be spit out. Which is a beautiful way to say that you have to navigate your relationships in such a way that you have to set some boundaries. And you have to allow for other people to set some boundaries, and you have to be able to open and listen. So that is one phrase that I think really hits at some of the wisdom in the tradition. A second resource that has been enormously helpful and we use with a lot of our teen groups is Maimonides' teachings on friendship when he is commenting on the classic section of the Mishnah, which says that you should acquire for yourself a friend. Maimonides writes a little bit about what different types of friends there are in the world, and also writes a little bit about what does it mean to find yourself a friend or acquire yourself a friend. So I like to show everybody my books. This is my Mishnah Torah, which has the commentary. And I just want to read one phrase here that helps us all reflect on friendship. It says, Al titchaber lefi midotecha. Don't make a friend based on your own personal qualities. Ela chitchaber lefi midot chaberecha. Rather, make a friend based on the personal qualities that you see in someone else. And Maimonides goes on to say that what you need to do in order to make a friend is not to look at somebody and say, are they the same as me? Do they have the same feelings and opinions as me? But you need to actually go beyond yourself and say, how is it that I can relate and empathize with another person? And then Maimonides talks about 3 different kinds of friendship. And here are the 3 different kinds of friendship that Maimonides talks about. So he talks about a chaver to'elet, which means a friend that you benefit from them. So you could be playing a video game with this friend, or you could be working on an art project for this friend, but it may not be anything more than just doing something together with that friend. Then there is a chaver nachat, and that is a friend that you pursue joy with, somebody you pursue pleasure and satisfaction with. And here Maimonides discusses what it means to have a friend you can tell secrets to, and what it means to have a friend you can trust, and what it means to have a friend who you can enjoy eating and conversation with. And then finally, the last and the highest degree of friendship is chaver ma'ala. And this word means to uplift, somebody who lifts you up, somebody who, when you fall, and we all fall, can be there to help you and to support you. So one of the things that we like to think about in terms of thinking about teens and friendship is that many of them are in a place where they are developing friendships. And there's all sorts of knowledge about how many hours it takes to make that higher level friend. One of my favorite studies said it takes 110 hours working together with a person, doing something together with a person, to be in that place where they know you and they understand you. You've had tension with them, and then they can help you when you are feeling down. So in each of our programs, I think that what we try to do is what we said at the very beginning of this conversation, which is we try to give voice to teens and allow them to have a space to reflect with each other, reflect their lives and their stories and support one another. And it is my hope that all of the work that's happening in the Jewish community right now will create spaces for teens to do just that, and that their resilience and their remarkable ability to pull through will help them look back many, many years from now and look back on this time and think that the Jewish community was there to support them and create those spaces. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. And I want to thank everybody at the Jewish Federation for making it possible.